Okay, so we continue. Okay, so we continue with the thought. Last time we discussed about Sapphire and his pupil Benjamin, and the thoughts were especially related to the positive views towards culture and tradition. Last time I told you that there was no possibility of the existence of any language if there is no culture, because directly or indirectly culture is involved in everything, in every speech. This doctrine of positive views were taken by Herder as well. Herder and his friends Humboldt's the two philosophers and thinkers consider about this positive attitude or positive thinking about culture, and how culture helps a philosopher or helps a person to shape his thought or to shape his ideas. Well, in this pattern, we come to see that culture has two kind of language. One that's called linguistic relativity. Linguistic relativity. What is linguistic relativity? In fact, in linguistic relativity, we try to understand that there is no end of structures in language. No end of structures in language. What does that mean? In fact, it means that the doctrines which we make to decide or determine that there are certain rules based on which we can speak or we can write the things is not possible. In fact, the reality is that everything that we say, after some time, that becomes rule. I think when I was telling you about diachronic and synchronic pattern of language, I told you that something is there as a synchronic for some times, and after that, even the synchronic has a kind of history that's followed. In the same way, if one thing that's wrong is wrong for one time, but when many persons start following it, start obeying it, start writing it, after some time even that wrong thing is accepted as the truth, as the real one, as the rule, and all that. Definitely, this concept which we discuss here we want to discuss here is very simple, that we cannot decide any language by rules only. The rules are infinite, and infinity is language. Good evening, dear. And this is how the language goes to be limitless. When Herder Humboldt comes, they think this philosophy that there is a linguistic relativity. The second concept come, and that was linguistic determinism. What is linguistic determinism? In fact, it means it is almost opposite the former one, where we say that linguistic relativity is there. It means language determines thought. What does that mean? That everything is in the reach, or everything is in its approach of language. Means the thought that arises in our mind is especially arising because of that language. If we have no language, we cannot think. Since we have language, so the language is deciding thought. First it is language that gives shape how to represent a particular thought. Then there is existence of a thought. According to this philosophy, determinism, language comes first, and language decides the thought. Whether one has to speak, or whether one has to listen, whether one has to listen or one has to speak, it is determined by the combination of language. When even the two philosophers are decided, it is Humboldt who considers linguistic determinism very closely. LDT. He considers it even closely. Because when we are discussing about Herder believes in a thought that there is independency of language and thought. Means it is not truth that there is language and thought and they are dependent. So Herder considers about independency of language and thought. In this field, one thing is very common. They don't believe in complete classicism, because if you see that language and thought are independence, means neither language is going to govern thought, nor thought is going to govern a language. It means we are not following rules strictly. It means a little classical views we have. but we are ignoring that classical as well. We have a little romantic views that, but even there we are trying to ignore it. Means ignoring and following. These are the two concepts. They are neither classicist nor romanticist. In fact, they stand somewhere between classicism and romanticism. Yeah, harder and humble both. They don't believe in universalism closely. Language cannot be taken as something which is from the concept of thought or concept of language only. Means different scholars think it differently. There was language even before the thought was organized or reordered, and there was a thought that was even before language. So it is not going, if we think that language considers like their language decides our thought, so it seems to be classical. If we consider that there is independency of the language and thought, it seems to be romantic. But actually, they are neither completely romantic nor completely classical. Their classicism and romanticism stand in the midst of the talk. Means there can be possibility of anything. This possibility was later examined and presented by lexemes, or if we go to lexical structures, you cannot find only certain lexical relationship or lexical combination. Instead, it seems to be almost different. There can be different or various structures of language, structures and forms of language. And it is human language. Human who doesn't like to be governed by rules. In fact, human is a being who believes in the thought that there should be a kind of relation, the relation which presents man as a man. Man was born, in fact, free, and so is about his language. Language cannot be governed by man, or language cannot be governed, in fact, by any certain rules. It will take various shapes, various forms. So we will have continually trying that there should be different language, different lexemes, different structures, different forms, because human are different. They are different, so will be their language. After some time, there was need of pronoun. Why pronoun? Because it seems that the whole function cannot be done by noun only. Noun means primary. If one thinks that only one person can do everything, it is not possible. Or if we think that only one rule can do everything, it is also not possible. Instead, what is possible? That even a single thing should be supported by other things, and their support will stand in the favor of the things. How language varies. In one word, there is no fixed doctrine of linguistics. There is no perfect doctrines of linguistic. It varies according to culture, according to social class, according to region, region, according to climate, and many more factors are there that decide our language. We cannot be always the same. There is always the need of pronoun in English. That means there is always the need of subordinate in English, and that will remain because this is how language survives. The doctrines of relative linguistics or linguistic relativism or linguistic determinism, or even the last time we studied about structuralism or generativism, functionalism, behaviorism, monism, dualism, mentalism, materialism, they all are the part of our language. So language cannot be strictly confined to one rule or one form. This was very clear from the very beginning of our class that it is language that helps us to present our thought, and it is thought that is to be presented by our language. Both are complement for each other. Neither can be independent. Neither can survive without the other. So, in a brief, there are many topics and many terms that we have discussed during the whole lecture of linguistics, and you guys need to learn them by heart because the questions will be related to the doctrines. Like the doctrine, like here, they are also doctrines. Sometimes the philosophers who present those doctrines. So you need to learn them. If we consider about Benjamin or we consider about Sapir, they also continue the same type of modern thought where they also try to set it to be almost structuralism, because modern doctrines, whether it's relativism or whether it's structuralism, functionalism, they all had one concept, and that was the concept of structuralism. Primarily, the whole things move around the structuralism if it is concerned with language. And that's all from the linguistics, and there ends linguistics. तो आज से linguistics खत्म होता है. कल से हम लोग कुछ अलग शुरू करेंगे. देखते हैं क्या शुरू कर देंगे.